Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to an FS Club seminar. It is a real delight today to take, particularly on a Friday afternoon when we all ought to be thinking about things over the weekend, what is the future of news in the wake of COVID-19? And I'm absolutely delighted to have with me today, as you can see here, Lawson Muncaster, the founder and owner of City A.M, and my brother Sheriff, Chris Hayward, Common Councilman and Deputy Chairman of Policy and Resources for the City of London Corporation. And we hope to have a discussion that leaves you with a few thoughts today. You're used to seeing me, Michael Mainelli, as chairman and my wonderful visage. But today, for obvious reasons, that I have my brother Sheriff here, I felt obliged to put forward a slightly different photo, as both Chris and I have the privilege of being sheriffs of the City of London for the period 2019 to 2020, but it's been extended to 2021. And this is me in my full regalia, and you will get to see Chris in his full regalia in a moment. Lawson assures us that he doesn't go for dressing up, so we will see. Meanwhile, in this era of fake news, it's an important thing to realize that the competition amongst news is one of the most important things. The only way to really reduce fake is to ensure that there's open and competitive news sources, and that we think about what we do. And today, I'm delighted that our FS Club sponsors allow us to do this. When I say thank you to our sponsors, it's heartfelt and sincere. They're an extremely tolerant group of people, allowing us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance, and often with a social purpose. So thank you to the sponsors. One of the things you'll know is that we do change the format around a bit. Today's format is my job is to get out of the way so that Lawson and Chris can talk to you about their thoughts. Lawson is going to speak for just under 10 minutes on his thoughts about news in a time of COVID. Then Chris, but we've actually got a pretty good solid 20 minutes for questions and comments. And I would encourage you to use the GoToWebinar facility, please, to send questions or comments, which I'll feed into our conversation and discussion. The GoToWebinar facility is easy to use, and if you email me a question, I won't read it because I'm going to be very busy participating in this. So please do use the question facility. We'd like it. Well, with that, I think it really falls. This is a lovely picture of Lawson with no regalia whatsoever. Lawson, over to you.
Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Some homework first. I am a founder of City A.M and a co-owner with 4 other gentlemen. I would like to own it all, obviously, and I certainly would love to and very proud to have done it all on my own, but obviously not. A gentleman called Jens Torper and I set the business up with the backing with 2 lovely gentlemen from Holland in 2005. So you can imagine COVID is a piece of piss, considering the last 15 years we've been going through the highs and lows of the wonderful world of business, financial crisis, referendums, elections, etc., and now COVID. Let me take you back to March. Board meeting in Holland. Things were rosy. 2020 looked good. Diversification on different assets that we had were well down the road. And then suddenly COVID hit us. And when I say the speed of which it took hold, I was walking across a bridge, the famous Tower Bridge here in London, on the Tuesday, and I recognised that there was no one else running across the bridge with me. I felt as if it was my own bridge. I got to the office, and literally there was 4 people in the office, and I saw a stack of newspapers of City A.M beside Bank Station, which is normally gone before 8 in the morning. So I didn't really have to phone up my McKinsey friends and ask them their opinion. We had no readers, we had no advertisers, and we had a product that was hand distributed, which obviously brought people together. So we took the decision in a millisecond to close and stop printing on that Friday and put ourselves into furlough, or the majority of staff into furlough, and concentrate the communication of City A.M through cityam.com. It was a frightening week, and I think most businesses and most people on this call will probably understand it was something that we didn't know. And I think the stage 1 of this whole process for us, and I would imagine most people here, was the ultimate fear of what's next. what's going to happen. And I think that without government in the UK, Rishi came to the plate. It was unprecedented. He got the money out the door. He gave the security to bosses like myself who employ people, that we knew that we could put ourselves into some sort of hibernation on the main tool of City A.M. and still realize there's a future for that newspaper. I'm delighted to say that, come the beginning of September, the print will start rolling and we'll be back on the streets again, albeit in a place where it will be different. I think that we have to understand that tomorrow will not be what we had before COVID, but I do think we have to start to go forward is to get back to where we were before and learn from these issues. So everything in our business right now is to secure the offices and making sure that on day 7th of September, 2 days after our 15th birthday, we would be able to accommodate the 50 staff that we employ at their desks safely, securely. So that's where our angle's been. The silver lining of any dark cloud allows us to be proud that our readers move from the paper product onto online very quickly. And we've seen an amazing amount of growth in that area, something I'm proud of. Now, news. What has happened in COVID-19? What's happened in these 16 weeks? Well, actually, I think it was happening already, but it's now magnified to the point where it actually appalls me. And let me try to explain why. We have a huge ability to communicate through social media that we never did before. We've now got 6 billion journalists and 6 billion views, all diversifying down different channels. But we, the viewer, we, the reader, the receptor, has the opportunity to actually just accept the news that they want. So actually what we've done very quickly is we polarize and cocoon people into different places. And we completely split the countries in two. On opinion be politics, Black Lives Matter, gender, everything has now got an opinion over this or that. And of those two opinions, that now represents 80% of the total populace who are either disagreeing or agreeing in certain topics. And therefore it's created fuel this hate. And the 20% of reasonable thought authors and journalists are not being heard. So we now have a very binary structure and where the countries have been divided. This plays into our politicians' hands in some respects, but it really divides us as a country. So not only do we just see this in London, you see this throughout the world. And so my only hope going forward is that we can start to educate the consumer, our reader, our viewer, whatever, is to start to listen to the other side, to make sure that your view is balanced, to make sure that you're actually not listening or reading fake news. And it is in abundance. And what we've got to work out is how do we undo and untangle this labyrinth of what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false in a very short period of time. I've never seen such a big opportunity for quality journalism than I have now. The defining product of what a journalist does is obviously he has his social media as a brand, but he also works for a brand. Now, when do you say, well, when you're working on social, can you represent yourself and not the brand you work for? So there's huge businesses, much bigger than myself, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times. We're all going through this process of what makes an independent journalist and what makes someone who works for that brand. So we've got some very difficult but interesting hurdles to overcome. Yes, there's headwinds, but what we do know is we've got an audience, we've got a receptive audience globally, be that online, offline, wherever you want to go. People want to listen. But it's our duty, our responsibility as media owners is to deliver true and factual news. Business news is much easier at City A.M. We know how to play the game. We know understand the dynamic of integrity, the truth between getting a story, speaking to a business, coming back to that, referencing. We cannot make it up. Yeah. What I challenge other media outlets to do is start to thinking a little bit more of authenticity, respect, and respecting the person and ultimately that's reading your news. And they're not doing that. So these are the challenges that I sort of seen in the last 16 weeks. What's the future? Next slide, please, Michael. What's the future for all our newspapers? I think that the more and more online gets itself into a better place. You've seen the advertisers putting out a Facebook this week. We had issues with, I think, YouTube a few years ago. These are telling signs that they must get their stuff right. because if they don't get it right, advertisers will fall, and therefore the natural market and capitalism that we believe in 100% is actually taking to effect, and therefore they have to clean up their side of the business. We are very much at City A.M. delivering non-gender. We're looking at far more about what is the subject matter, the integrity of libertarianism, treating people with respect both as a reader, but we write about our readers. They're our business people. They consume our news. So we have a very direct relationship with them. So we've got to encourage other newspapers and other news outlets to follow that lead. That's my sort of summarize for the time being, Michael.
That was fantastic, Lawson. Short, sharp, and to the point. Thank you very much.
It's a Friday afternoon, remember?
That's a good one. We'll have a good discussion in a moment. Now, Chris, as I mentioned, is equally as well garbed as I, and here he is all frocked up and with lockdown, sadly, with nowhere to go. Chris, your thoughts on the impact of COVID-19 in the City of London?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Michael. And I follow on what Lawson said in his opening of his remarks, that it was the instantaneous impact that most of us felt of COVID-19, which I think shocked certainly the whole of the United Kingdom and certainly hit the City of London in a major, major way. We have normally on a typical working day pre-COVID, 513,000 commuters coming into the city a day and just 8,000 residents. And even last week, when I look at the numbers of last week and the week before, we were down at only about 5,000 people coming back into their offices at this time. So there's a huge lack of confidence out there in the working population around safety and around when it is going to be okay to come back into work. And of course, the government are telling everybody at the moment, and probably quite rightly, work at home if you possibly can do. And of course, that's what we came to see. The vast majority of us all on screen working from home. And actually, I found that a very tiring existence, more tiring than actually being in meetings, just looking at the screen day in and day out. And if you're a young person, and the demographic of the working population in the city these days is much, much younger than it was 20, 30 years ago, and you're sharing a house on the outskirts of Greater London, maybe with 2 or 3 other people, and your office is your bedroom, and you're sat on the end of a bed with a laptop balanced on your knees, believe you me, for your own mental health, that can't be a great way to be conducting your business going forward. So we've got to move from where we are. I think that many people have said that actually it's been amazing how virtual working has worked. And if you talk to the big insurance companies, financial services companies, they have found that most of their managers and their staff have been able to effectively work online. And I think coming back, we'll find a mix of people still partially working online and partially coming back into the office. And it will take time. Until people get confidence on using public transport, it's going to be a major, major problem. Today, just 20% occupancy of our underground or metro is where we are. And if you compare that with Paris, for example, where 50% of those people returning to work are now using their underground or metro system, that is a huge, huge difference. So we have to instill some sort of confidence. Next slide, if I may, please, Michael. So, where will the office be post-COVID? Actually, I think it will come back. I seriously believe that the City of London will experience growth again, will experience demand in office space, but those office spaces will be different. There will need to be more alignment, more space around offices, more flexibility around offices. When I was chairman of planning and transportation in the city, this was something that was already happening, because what was happening was we were moving from just the big corporates being in the city to the SMEs starting up in the City of London as well. And many of those SMEs don't take office space in one entire tower. They want to take just one floor plate, or they want to take a corner of a floor plate. So we were already saying to architects and designers, you've got to be more flexible in your designs of office space. And I think what COVID-19 will have done is it will have accelerated the need for that flexibility in office space. One thing that's important is that we're human beings. You know, we survive by face-to-face human interaction with each other, and you never get quite that same presence talking online as you do face-to-face. And for young people particularly, they want to be able to socialize in the city. They want to be able to, you know, work and play. That's part of the culture. So we have to get our cafes and our restaurants and our bars and our vibrant nightlife back up in the City of London. And for me, that's always been about becoming a 7-day-a-week destination. You know, tourists need to come into the city because at the moment, Saturdays and Sundays are dead in the square mile. And we really need to enliven that. We're doing a lot of things, I think, which actually help us to do that. But in the short term, when we don't know how long it's going to take to get people back into the offices, when many people are saying, well, we will only have 25% of our office people back by September, and maybe not back fully until the new year. I think it is up to us to try and instill confidence in the market, confidence in people coming back to work, within obviously HMG guidance, within a safe working environment. But we know it can be kept safe. And if everybody is responsible in their actions, then I think we can seriously rebuild the City of London to where some of those numbers were. One of the things I would just say is only having 8,000 residents in the square mile has meant that as I speak to you today, there is not one single case of COVID in the square mile, which is remarkable, frankly. But you know, when you think maybe there's only 8,000 residents, perhaps it's not so crazy. I think I've got one more slide, Michael.
That is.
That's it. That's it.
That was
That's
it.
it. Well, on to Q&As. Can I just finish on one point, Michael, if I may?
Of course.
Part of what we're trying to do as the City of London Corporation, in terms of giving people confidence to come back to work, is to ensure that certainly our pavements and our road space allows people to socially distance, so that they come back to work when they're in the square mile by knowing it feels safe. The challenge is, can we get people to feel safe again on public transport? Because if you live more than 10 kilometres out of the centre of London, walking or cycling into London probably isn't going to be an option.
Wow. Well, we're going to cover some of these points as well, and the board is fired up with comments and questions. But just before I begin, I should have probably pointed something out. It's been noticed by a number of viewers, Chris, including Robert Woodthorpe Brown. He said at the very beginning, gosh, isn't Chris slim? And he said that at 14:01. And this is a picture of the dynamic duo together. And I can assure you, Chris has lost 49 pounds and raised nearly 20,000 in aid of charity. So yes, COVID has been a worrisome time for you, and it's worried away all the weight. So well done, you, Chris.
I think I lost it for the right reasons, Michael. Let's put it that way, not because of COVID, I'm pleased to say.
I know. Anyway, just to sort of kick things off and get stuff going, we have Neil Webster here. Says he thinks Lawson's presentation was very interesting. Does Lawson or Chris have a view on what the biggest changes will be once things return to a new normal? And I ask that because Lawson, you opened up with there was a continuation of existing trends. So maybe both of you would like to talk about what were the existing trends that are accelerating, and what do you think is going to be the biggest change or two in what might be a new normal? Lawson.
I just want to, when I started out in my earlier comments, one of the points I made was that it seemed to me that we'd lost all these readers straight away, and that's a fact. We've lost a commuter. But up until that point, I think what we'd noticed in research over the 15 years, more and more people were actually only working part-time. When I say part-time, they were not coming to their workplace on a 5-day-a-week cycle. And actually what was that someone picking the paper up 4 times a week in 2005, that individual was picking up the paper 3 times a week in 2015. And that just demonstrates the nature of what the city is and the nature of what technology can do. The enabling of people working from home has already been very much part and parcel. And one of the reasons why banks and the city was so easy to actually get into that situation was they were already doing it, just not on the same scale of what was happening, what was achieving. So the ability to do that is great, and it's very strong, and I think a lot of CEOs understand that. I would argue that the reason why you come back from doing your job is that collective responsibility with other people. And I don't see that changing either. What you might find is in 2022, 23, that person is only picking the paper up twice a week, not 3 times a week. So I genuinely think that the populace of the city will return back to probably the same kind of number you mentioned of 500,000. But will it be on a 3-day a week or a 4-day a week? That's the thing that will obviously have a resulting downturn in footfall over a period of 5 days. But the city's got so many different things, as you already explained earlier. The SME business, when we first moved to the city in 2005, there wasn't a restaurant open on Saturday or Sunday. There wasn't SMEs. There wasn't laundrettes. Yes, there was traditional restaurants and traditional bars. But what we've seen in the last 10, 15 years has been a transformation of the city from sort of bowler hats and entitled men with umbrellas to young, trending women and men, going about their daily lives in a fast and furious way, and not just traditionally looking at, stocks and shares, accountancy, fintech. I mean, these things are all piling into the city as we, I would imagine even as we speak.
Good. Chris, any comments on what you see as a new normal change that we really ought to take account of?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Lawson is saying. And I've always taken the view in a way that every crisis, such as this pandemic, also presents an opportunity. And we kind of have a renewed opportunity to resell and reposition the City of London. That's not to reposition it anywhere away from it being the global capital, financial and professional services, but it's to be increasingly diversified as well. Diversified in the SMEs, diversified in the employees. And I do think it will be, just a continuation of what we've already seen. Technology allowing people to work from home as well as to work in the office. We did a survey. We only employ 4,000 people just over in the City of London Corporation, but we did a survey of our staff during COVID. And actually, the message that came back was they wanted to come in 3 days a week, but not 5 days a week. And I think that 3-4 days will become the new norm.
Yeah, as a financial center, we ought to recognize portfolios matter, and we have run the portfolio quite a bit over the last 20 years, but there's more to be done. Folks, just an interesting question here from Paul Phillips for both of you, Lawson and Chris, because Chris, you were deep into the lockdown decision. Lawson, you were covering it. And Paul's asking, why did none of the media challenge the only narrative that lockdown is the only approach that's acceptable? And he's pointing to areas like Sweden and the risk-based intervention. And of course the scale of the financial impact. Do both of you feel that there was sufficient discussion about the policies that were taken?
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Don't mind if you like. Look, I think when there's a crisis, and this was a crisis of huge magnitude, when people are being told that there's a virus out there that kills, the first reaction is, who do we believe? Where do we go for information? And actually, believe it or not, I think people go to the government of the day and they look to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet as to what the message is based upon the medical and scientific advice that they are taking. So I don't think there was time at that moment in March for a huge debate that took another week, because some of us believe that maybe we should have gone into lockdown a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier and could have saved lives. So I don't think there was the time to have a newspaper debate about, should we go the Swedish route or should we go the British route? I think, there was a moment of panic and we all turned to the government.
I think Mr. Phillips, has a good point, though. I think that what the government did at the time in terms of getting the NHS right and putting us in a position to save lives, which I think it did very, very well. And I think I take my hat off. I think that the way economically it was dealt with was the best in the world. And I'm very, very open to argue with anyone on that point. I think the Treasury, the banks, yes, there's a little bit of problems with CBILS, but we're getting through that with the European law. But they really responded well, and they understand that the future of the country is reliant on these businesses surviving that are good. I challenge a little bit about the Dunkirk spirit slightly, and I think the government's made a mistake there, because they put out basically, we need your help, everybody that's small and beautiful, and a collective response is going to be better than none. Well, to be fair, on the health side, I see a little bit of, there's a lot of boats at Dunkirk, and there's a lot of boats on the coast, and they haven't sailed. And so these small businesses that put a lot of time and effort into trying to be there for the ready have, I think, they've not been dealt with properly. But actually, to the point of we cannot right now determine whether Sweden or Britain or America have made a success of this or not. I mean, I don't like inquiries. Inquiries are the things in the future, and by the time we get there, no one really gives a shit. Okay? So, but at the same time, this time round, yeah, these inquiries are very important, but I would never ever say that anybody who's in a position of power persuasion in government has done a bad job. They've all tried bloody hard. I mean, Boris nearly died. I mean, you know, when I read some commentary from people, you know, this is a gentleman that is exactly, had a baby, nearly died, you know, dealing with Brexit. There's a lot of things on his plate, and that's throughout the whole cabinet. And I also say the shadow cabinet as well. I think there's been a collective response that I've looked upon it almost in a respectful way of politicians rather than a negative one, because they actually have sort of stood together in something that no one knew about. I mean, and we still don't know about. I mean, scientists will not say to us, I had COVID in February. Scientists will still not say that I have not got a chance of getting it again. And yet there's not one person in the world, right, that's had the virus again. It's not come back to that person. So science is very, very factual and cautious. And in a world that we live in today, we have to also take practical steps of getting the other parts of the world moving forward again, regardless of that caution. And I think that's the place where we are right now. What steps do we take?
Yeah, it's nice to hear some positive views. A lot of big decisions needed to be made, and not all of them are going to be right. And I think we must congratulate people on taking them. Nevertheless, just moving on to property and development, and later on to transportation. A couple of comments here, maybe a bit snappy, but what are your opinions? John Cullen would like to know: will there be a greater exodus of people and companies out of London to the regions post-COVID?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the government will say that a lot of its investment, and has said, is about levelling up across the country. But I don't think that necessarily means an exodus from London or from the southeast. I still personally see the southeast and London remaining as the economic engine room of the United Kingdom. So I don't think there'll be a huge flood out to the regions necessarily. I mean, quite interestingly, from a property and a development perspective, you know, on planning in the City of London in April, which was our first full month in lockdown, we handled more pre-application discussions in our planning department than we'd handled in the 5 years before that. So what does that say about people's confidence in development and investment and future growth in the London market? And we've handled some major planning applications since that time as well. Now, that doesn't mean those consents will all get built out immediately. I'm first to respect that. But there is still a huge amount of confidence, I think, in London.
I mean, I think, Chris, one of the reasons that, you know, I believe that Britain has suffered badly with this whole virus is because, you know, a lot of people come to this country every day. A lot of people want to be in this country, I think, and they want to be in London. I mean, I'm a Scot, right? And I love flying down on the Monday morning to the greatest city in the world. And by Friday, I love flying back home to God's own country. Okay? So, but there is a desire of people, and I'm not alone on that. London has an international place in the world. It's a resilient city. And I think things will change, but the demand to be in that marketplace, it is a live global trading house, or a trading city. And it transcends all sorts of different walks of life, and the financial part is one of it. I think London concentrates as the 6th largest French city in France. It's the 5th largest Dutch city. And, you know, these are things that London's not going to change. It's a truly international, buzzing marketplace for business.
And I think my accent also underscores that. I want to turn to transportation, but just before I do so, Chris, do you want to just 15 seconds, because you've had a major decision, haven't you? For example, on the Museum of London.
Yeah, we have, Michael. I mean, for the business city, which is what we predominantly are, we also are the cultural city, and we've got the Culture Mile, which we regard as running in parallel with the business city. And we have passed during the lockdown a major planning consent to convert effectively Smithfield, the old markets at Smithfield, into a new Museum of London. This is something of significance, not just for the City of London and London as a whole, but I think for the whole of the United Kingdom. and it's a real regeneration project of that part of the square mile. And actually, you're seeing now also in this slide more and more public spaces. Now, of course, we're only a square mile. They can't all be on the ground, but they can all be in buildings as well. And you're going to see more and more of these, what we're calling public parks in the sky, open space areas in office buildings where people can actually gather. So, yeah, culture, really important part of the city's agenda.
Thank you. On transportation, Joseph Robertson, and this is, I think, it's definitely for both of you, Lawson, with your distribution hat on, how might you instill confidence for people traveling on the transport system without a vaccine, and can the system adapt and cope?
I think from us, from a business point of view, I think that we've got three different strategies in place when it comes to distribution. One is that the country, the commuting population, has not got itself in a state that it can effectively feel comfortable on public transport. Bear in mind, 80% of all Britain actually commute by car. It's just in London we have a totally different phenomena. So it's very much London-centric, this question. I believe that with a fair wind, right, that I believe the next 9 weeks, if we don't have spikes and we don't have secondary inflared areas in London, and we've had great beach parties 2 weeks ago and I've seen no spikes. So maybe the virus is in some ways slowing down or burning itself out, or there's something happening at that level. So, and this is me being very confident. I'm not talking with a science point of view, but I think the next 8 weeks will be a massive learning curve, and indeed the next 4 weeks when it comes to transportation issues. We have got to get that number to up to 50-60%, because if we don't do that, the way I distribute my newspaper, it's a very simple science. It's my responsibility to give a reader an opportunity to pick the paper up 4 times before when he leaves his home or her home to arriving in the office. And currently we use public transport is probably 50% of that opportunity. So obviously we have to have a different way of looking at how we do that. But it's all to do with the confidence, not just of the underground and the system itself. It's about how people are feeling and the science behind that. And I think we have to maintain that relationship with government and scientists, that they call the shots. But I'm an optimist.
You make an interesting point to me about the scale of knowledge acquisition and change. You mentioned scientists earlier, the state of the vaccine, et cetera. Roy Vella here says it's not just COVID, it's the equivalent of events from 1918, the Spanish influenza, 1929. We are seeing one of the greatest depressions. And of course, we mustn't forget 1968 and the student revolutions and Black Lives Matter. So all this is happening at once. We're trying to process this at a time when this convergence is absolutely enormous. We have a few regular viewers here, and this is from Ian from Cape Spear in Newfoundland, who has a question for both of you. Do you envisage fewer people working and living in the City of London in the future? And if so, how do you see your respective organizations, the corporation and City A.M, adapting to a more residential, less office-oriented city? Do you see that as a possibility, Chris?
Well, no, I don't personally. I think we will have still huge numbers of people coming into work in the city. I don't think that our residential population is going to change numerically very much at all, because we simply haven't got the space to build residential in the square mile. It is a business city. So I actually don't see that happening. I think it's going to take a couple of years and maybe longer to build back up numerically. And Joseph's question, if I may just return to that point, Michael, is important about how do we get people back on the public transport? Because what we can't do is encourage people to come back in cars. We've got, just 4,200 parking spaces in the square mile for, 513,000 commuters. It makes the case. So we have to get confidence back. And a lot of this is going to be Lawson's area as well, because a lot of people will judge whether it's safe to come back into the city by what they read in the papers and what they see on the TV. So, we need not fake news, we need truthful news and strong, confident news based on what government are telling us.
I think we've got ourselves in a situation where I made that point of 40-40-20. I think there's 20% of people are really thinking about a dynamic, and the questions have been asked by the listeners that are quite, astute and getting some sort of balance between the two. And then unfortunately, you've got 40% saying it's doomsday and they're not coming back until next 2025. And there's others that wanted to be down the local pub in April. So, like anything, there has to be a balanced view. But what I would say about the getting people back to work, it's all very well with those that are sitting in situations like ourselves where we're open to talk quietly. There's nobody in the room. These younger people who are reliant heavily on doing the productivity part of these businesses' jobs at the moment, right now, are sitting in bedrooms with laptops and listening to other people doing the same sort of thing. And then magnified with that is the whole Zoom culture where loudmouth people like me dominate. And so therefore people that are not necessarily, wanting to have that, they become less confrontational, and it actually magnifies the isolation part between your staff and yourself. Right?
Very true.
Mental illness is a massive issue. So we've got to take these things into consideration. I'm a big component of mental illness in the city anyway, so I wanted to bring that up. But I'm now leaning very much to saying, let's look at September 7 as back to school. Let's look at getting the city full of employees, regardless if it's a percentage per day, but let's have every employee coming into the city once a week. Now, for that to happen, we need a TfL to open its door, understand how we can get people from one to another. And one more interesting point. Currently in my office, we operate a security system based through elevators. If we were running at 10% capacity with no lifts, it would take my staff till midday to get into the office, having arrived at 8. So these are real practical things that need to be addressed. And we have time to do it, but they have to be addressed soon.
Well, I think it's interesting because you've lit up the board, as I said, and I've just spent 30 seconds on some of the comments, which show that the audience is rather divided on many of these issues as well. So Donald McRae believes that the city might be able to operate virtually, and COVID-19 and zero carbon have said that the city commute model is perhaps unsustainable. Interesting point. Mike Wardle wants to know, will we see more people living in the center city? So back to Ian from Newfoundland's comment about changes perhaps in the residential commercial balance. There's an interesting question here from Liz Thrussell, which I'll answer. Many councils invested in dubious property development pre-COVID and are now seriously in debt. Did the city also fall into the same trap? And both Chris and I, as alderman and common councilman and sheriffs, can assure you, Liz, no, not the case at all. So that's been a good one. Mike Bradley Russell is, very interested whether the corporation will consider greater residential population in the square mile if office usage falls dramatically. So a lot going on out there, but I think I'd like to move on to the topic that was featured strongly in the title, which was very much the idea of the role of news. And back to some of the earlier discussion points that you raised initially, Lawson. But I know, Chris, you've got a view as a developer and a politician as well. So the first one I'll start off with, if I might, is Hugh Purser, who is curious about how will quality journalism get rewarded financially, especially when, as you said, Lawson, many readers can get what they want to hear, even though it may not be true or truthful.
Do you want me first?
Don't you want a paycheck?
I was getting worried. I was being tucked up the two sheriffs there. I thought it was going to be attacked. So, look, quality journalism is structured in such a way that it is very much read by demographics, and at the high end, opinion written words, people pay money for that, and they are brands in their own right. And the majority of these editorial people are phenomenal assets to themselves and to the brands they work for. And I would never challenge that, and that will never ever go away. In fact, it's probably too easy to make money at a mediocrity level today in journalism, where you get yourself a couple of million followers on Facebook, writing a bit of nonsense and fake news, and suddenly finding yourself being financially rewarded. That's a very dangerous way to go down. And I think the challenge for anybody looking at premium journalism, where journalists are being paid decent cash, is making sure that they work in conjunction with the brand they represent and employs them, but it also allows them the integrity and the maturity to write on their own individual component, i.e. themselves, over these social platforms. Well, it's a very grey area. And we ourselves, we're our own journalists. We employ very young, experienced, clever journalism, and if there's such a word, and we give them a lot of respect. And so far, we've probably put 200 journalists into different jobs throughout the UK and abroad that have come from the City A.M world. And they do, and the reason why you do that, you treat them with respect and you get things back.
We have a couple of questions for you, Lawson, and a couple. I'll come back to you in a moment, Chris. So hang on, it's not one sided. It's just I think if you could be on point though. Jane is asking about clickbait, and this basically her observation is that mainstream media outlets online are trending towards extreme views to generate the clickbait. That may be commercial. How are you at City A.M going to avoid the temptation to exaggerate headlines and comments in order to attract? And there's a related question from Ian Aitchison. Do you see this unbalanced, aggressive binary news, I'm right, you're wrong, as a passing phase or a long-term issue? And as an indicator, he's sort of curious, do you see criticism of the BBC as fair, or is it a good sign that it's probably right because everybody's attacking it?
Well, to take three things. I think clickbait is just a phenomena that will go away eventually. I mean, it will play a part. It's here forever. But if you want to be deemed as a serious news channel, you just can't get yourself involved in that. I mean, simple rules is if I start doing stuff like that and exaggerate, I'll move a share price the wrong way and I'll probably get sued and I'll end up in jail. So there's good rules to stop me doing things like that. On the point about the bashing of the BBC, I thought it was a good thing that we do have everybody hating or everybody having a pop at a particular organisation like the BBC, because it must be doing something right by stimulating. I read The Guardian, right? It's a great read. I don't agree with The Guardian. I don't agree with its principles, right? But I do actually read it, and it's written very, very well. And every single journalist that works down there, I would take my hat off to. That's me as a person. But I think that back to the question of will people continue to go down this? I'm very worried, right, that unless we start from the top, and I talk about our journalists and politicians here, they like populists, they like binary, they like me or him or her and her. They love that stuff, and that's the danger.
That is the danger.
So maybe coalition governments in the future might represent more of a way of avoiding that issue of just them and us.
I'm going to try and squeeze three questions in the time available, one to Chris and then two to both of you. Chris, one of our viewers, Keith, says it's clearly possible to make huge improvements in air quality, improved by a third during lockdown. And where do we go from here? How does net zero carbon investment make its business case? We've loved it. I must say I live in Wapping, and it's still very polluted. Outside I can see it, but it's definitely less.
Yeah, I mean, I think zero carbon is a key political priority for those of us in government in the City of London, and I think we've got to invest in achieving it. It's going to take time. If the question comes from the Keith, I think it might be the guy who's the chairman of the Environment Committee in the city, and he's going to have a huge responsibility on his shoulders in the next 3 years to help us deliver that. Air quality is the silent killer. I know that from when I was closing Bank Junction to traffic a few years ago, and the air quality has risen as a result. And actually, that's something that started to happen hugely during the pandemic. We found that city air quality has improved. There's a huge way to go, but this is a political agenda item which we all need to join together on, because air quality, fundamental importance.
It's quite interesting, that point, because when you first did that, Chris, I was attacking you. I thought, what have you done? You lost your marbles, right? And within about a year of understanding the difference in the pollution levels and what actually happened, I was educated. So, sometimes you've got to be brave to do the decisions against the populist thought process. We'll talk about that's a classic example of how the readers, and yes, we'll find a way around how I deal with the bank in my car or my taxi or that was not as important as what was to reduce the polluted air that was in that particular part of town. No, I get it.
Okay, guys. Well, I've already got people coming in with thanks because we're running over, and that's just a sign of how much they've enjoyed your discussion here. There was a question from Lawson. I'd just like to get in, if you can do this very quickly.
Yeah.
Lawson, Herbie would like to know, as a former journalist, what recommendations for Facebook as it's hit by an advertising revolt?
We have a guy at our work called Harry Owen who's big in all this kind of privacy, oblique honesty stuff. I think the ethics of Facebook have leaned too far on freedom of speech and got themselves in a tangle. I think they have to become a little bit more draconian. I think they have to set very strong guidelines of people, what they're contributing to. You know, they've employed thousands and thousands of people to sort of police content. They've got to go even further. Because if they don't, you're opening it up for the devil. And I'm not a big fan of it at all.
Okay, two final questions for both of you. One from Keith. COVID-19 has driven changes in behavior unimaginable 4 months ago. What would the panel like to retain of what has changed? Chris?
I'd like to retain getting a buzz back into the city. Whatever you interpret a buzz to be, it's certainly about, you know, people engaging, people doing business, people enjoying the social aspects of the city. I'd like to see that buzz come back. It's a very dead place at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just add to that sentiment that every Monday morning when I fly down, I have butterflies in my tummy, flying into London. It's an incredible part of the world. I fly into City Airport, I get off at Bank Station, and sometimes I don't even make it to the office. I'm lured by a restaurant or a local pub. The bus is there and it's gone.
I think that is an absolutely brilliant point. You know, both Chris and I are boosters for the City of London and London in general and the UK and in all sorts of business, professional, technical and financial services. And we're thrilled to do it. But you're absolutely right. It's that emotional thing as the plane is turning into City Airport. You're like, I'm back. It is wonderful. I put this slide together, and I'm afraid I kind of suspect I know the answer, but the symbol for Financial Services Club is a fighting bull and bear, the bull obviously being the optimist and the bear the pessimist. Lawson, optimistic or pessimistic about the City of London, say, over the next 3 years?
In numbers, I think that 2021 will be 75% of 2019 in terms of where the economy, sort of revenues are. And we have to understand, we have to learn to live with that next year. And I think 22 will be sort of where we were in 19. And so therefore, there's going to be a rocky 18 months ahead. Yeah. Having said that, though, if you look at what people and the markets don't lie, they've seen through COVID, they've seen through 2021, and that's why you've got quite a strong FTSE and shares globally have seen through this thing. I mean, there is 3 or 4 caveats, and one is obviously the actual depth of this disease. Have we actually claimed the ground that we need to progress to get back to normality? If we have, that's a great step. I think economically speaking, yes, we're in debt, but we can afford that debt. And I think government's been lucky by the cheapness of that debt.
So bullish, great. Okay, and Chris?
I'm bullish about the medium-term outlook for London as a whole, but we've got to get this year behind us.
Okay. Guys, that was great. Really, really good. It is an intriguing problem. Even the whole idea of, you know, what's going on in the news that we're getting and the opinions that we're forming. Lawson, we depend on you and your team to help us form those opinions. You are effectively our community newspaper, and we love you for that. And I think you all know that. And Chris, you've been doing tremendous hard work, and it was very kind of you, Lawson, to point out the bravery of things like closing Bank Junction, which now turns out to be a great decision, but was certainly, Chris, you were in almost personal peril at certain points, and I sympathized for you. Sadly, all good things must come to a close. Hopefully COVID-19 will be amongst them. What I'd like to say is I've got 3 rounds of thanks to do, if I might. Again, and with genuine sincerity, I must thank our sponsors who let us hold such wide-ranging and free discussions. They're all involved in technology, economics, and finance, and therefore have a huge interest in where COVID-19 takes us in society. But then who wouldn't? Secondly, I need to thank the audience. You've been fantastic today, as ever, I might add. Very insightful questions and comments, and giving a lot of thanks to both Chris and Lawson here, and I will pass them all on to them. But I might also point out that we've got a series of webinars popping up next week, all of which should be fun. A very technical but interesting one on central counterparties and the future, and very interesting, the current consultation that's going on that's due at the end of July. Very strong thoughts coming from Kathleen Tyson and also from Martin Watkins. Well worth seeing that if you're involved in anything to do with trading, clearing, settlement. We have a fascinating thing with Sharon Constanson. I think something we would all sympathize with on Tuesday. Corporate governance. Why people are your board's biggest problem. Don't we all know that one? And then on Wednesday, a fascinating look at extremely ethical investing, veganism, no harm to animals. We'll be looking on Thursday at the employee share options world, employee share options and ownership world. And finally, Friday, we have Lord Jerry Grimstone, and I might point out K80 joining us in a kind of a double, which I will be participating in, a talk on building a global Britain. So fascinating week ahead. But the most important thanks today must go to my two panelists who have been absolutely superb. I had high hopes and you've exceeded them. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, as you know, in this age of COVID and GoToWebinars and Zooms, we're unable to give you the full audience feeling. So I will channel the audience, if I may, with my trusty little applause-o-meter from Buddha. And I'd like to thank both of you sincerely. And I hope perhaps we can get you both back sometime as this progresses. So thank you very, very much. And goodbye to one and goodbye to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.